there is something coming through in the announcement of grace, in the good news of Jesus Christ that affects everything, that changes everything. If we pan out for a bit and look at grace from the cosmological perspective, we see nothing less than the eternally expansive glory of God. The problem of loneliness and insignificance is actually a lack of glory. The glory of God solves those problems and a million others besides. It actually cracks the code of human existence and the future of creation. You see, God has not been silent. He has declared these realities. He actually tells us what he's going to do with everything. So for instance, Habakkuk 2:14 announces, "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." This is God's end game for everything. Glory. He wants his glory to fill the earth. He wants every nook and cranny to be gleaming with the magnificence of himself. This makes sense when we think about it because God's glory is the weightiness of all that he is, the beautiful summation of all of his attributes. And since God's glory is perfect and beautiful because it's, glorious, it makes sense that when we somehow receive that glory, we become more than what we already were. When creation itself somehow receives that glory, as in the vision of Habakkuk 2:14, it takes on the gleaming quality of redemption. And there are no places or things that are quarantined away from God's end game. His plan affects everything. So God's vision for his glory has dramatic implications for both the people who receive his grace and the people who reject it. It has very real impact on good deeds done in faith and bad deeds done in rebellion. And it makes no distinctions between the sacred and the secular, the spiritual and the natural. God has a plan for dirt and flowers, for sports and video games, for sandwiches and milkshakes, for anything else you can think of. His glory will be brought to bear on literally everything. So it's no wonder then that God is constantly talking about the priority of his glory throughout all of the scriptures. He's been declaring the point of everything from the moment time began. When light first appeared, it came from the eternally existing glory of God. And when man first appeared, he was made to image God's glory. When God saves his people from sin and from their own stupidity, he frequently says that he has done it for his own namesake. Ultimately, everything exists for the glorification of God. Some will say this makes God to sound like a narcissist, right? But that kind of objection fails to take into account two important truths. First, God is entirely perfect and thoroughly glorious. He's not like one of us pale creatures sort of puffing up our feathers to seem more glorious than we really are. He is actually what he says he is. And he is not really trying to prove himself to anybody, but more importantly, to show himself. And there's a difference. We could call a less than glorious person preoccupied with themselves a narcissist, or a less than perfect person claiming perfection a hypocrite. But God does not qualify for either of those categories, does he? He is fully glorious and totally perfect. So you and I should not begrudge his claiming perfection and glory. But secondly, and perhaps more to the point, God's prioritizing of his own glory actually helps us. It is the thing we actually need. We don't have the glory that makes us feel totally connected and wholly significant. And we need this. The world is broken and is desperately in need of mending. If God's glory answers the deepest longings of the human heart, why again would we fault him for talking himself up as often as he wants? Therefore, it's not for no reason that the theologians known as the Westminster Divines decided that the purpose of mankind was to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Mankind's joy is inextricably connected to God's glory. So in the end, what determines whether you are totally fulfilled and saved from ultimate despair is what you do with God's glory. Do you embrace it joyfully? Or do you resist it? The first option ends forever one's loneliness and insignificance. The second option, rejecting the glory of God, forever solidifies your loneliness and insignificance. So now you know the secret of the universe. The thing that makes sense of everything is the glory of God. The glory of God brought to bear by the grace of God. And God's modus operandi, if you will, his plan to reveal his secret is the proclamation of the message the Bible calls the good news, the gospel. The good news that the glorious God has sent the radiance of his glory to restore men who have sinned and fallen short of that glory. Martin Luther puts it this way, for what is the gospel but a declaring of the glory of God and his work? And so when you connect these realities together, the constellation that results projects a picture of creation that gives meaning to everything. It is as if the reality we know is simply a pale version of some greater reality out there, or rather in here, at least somewhere. You know, some scientists think that when the world was created, a kind of 6-dimensional twin split off from the 4-dimensional world that you and I exist in every day. And the brightest minds in the world use something called string theory to sort of explain how this could even be possible. It's an attempt to reconcile some of those irreconcilable truths in the world of physics and quantum mechanics. More fanciful minds have used these superstring theories to speculate about the possibilities of using wormholes to travel through portals in space or even back and forth through time. I'm not a science guy. I'm not sure what to make of all of the science of these things, the possibility of higher dimensions. But I will tell you, I love the idea of children crawling through a wardrobe and ending up in another world. There's something resonant about that, isn't there? There's a picture in that fictional story that makes us think, maybe there's a parallel truth to this. What if there is another world? See, if heaven is not rightly understood to be kind of someplace up in the sky, far away in outer space, but more simply the place where God is, and since God is omnipresent, wouldn't it make some kind of sense to say that heaven is a higher dimension? This doesn't make it less real than our world or even less tangible, but perhaps even more real, more tangible, even though it's invisible to us now. And yet, what I know of the glory of God and of his grace that comes through Jesus is that it makes the invisible visible. God does this in a variety of ways throughout the Old Testament, peeling back the curtain between earth and heaven every now and again to give some frail creature some supernatural vision of the other world, the glory behind that curtain. But he did it most decisively when he sent his son, when he came himself in the flesh. God became man, and in doing so, the twin dimensions of heaven and earth get a little mixed up. It happened every time Jesus healed a leper or walked on water or raised the dead. It certainly happened after his crucifixion when he came back from the dead himself. And one of the first things Jesus did with those resurrected, glorified hands and mouth was eat breakfast. Surely nothing escapes the grasp of the glory of God. So now you know the secret of the universe. And since you know the secret of the universe, you're ready to discover how this secret unlocks the meaning to everything. God is actually telling a story in the world about everything. But in order to see how God's endgame impacts our everyday life, we ought to consider how our everyday life fits into the story itself. What story is God telling with this glory, grace, and gospel stuff? What is the story that God is telling?